They never remembered us. Not the Council of the Nine Suns, not the insectoid kings of Cathar, not even the historians in the floating libraries of Rho Prime. They all spoke of themselves as the architects of civilization, but they never remembered Earth, never remembered us, until the day our tombs cracked open. It started in silence. A drifting ruin, ancient beyond reason, emerged from the dead gravity of a neutron star. No signals, no crew, no purpose, just metal, old, jagged, and black like it had been dragged through a star. The scavengers who found it called it the coffin. They joked about it being haunted. They weren't wrong. That wreckage was one of ours, left behind after we burned the stars, after we made gods bleed. Buried deep inside it was the last living echo of a forgotten race. A man, cryogenically locked, DNA warped beyond recognition by time and purpose. A man bred for war, made in Earth's final days, when survival meant shedding everything but hate. They woke him up, and the galaxy changed. His name wasn't passed down, not in their tongues. The machines called him Subject 11-9A. The Turgan priests called him the Woken Sin. The survivors, the few who saw him and lived, gave him a simpler name, Human. I wasn't there when he rose. But I've seen the footage. I've read the classified accounts from mercenaries, soldiers, and terrified diplomats who survived the aftermath. I've seen what he did to the Ark Fortress of Kravel, how he took a ship the size of a continent and turned it into a flaming grave in under 5 minutes. Not with ships, not with fleets, with his hands. But this isn't just a story about destruction. It's about memory, regret, and the cost of arrogance. Because they thought we were extinct, because they believed Earth was a myth, a dead rock where some primitive species once sparked and died in the dark. They never asked why there were ruins on moons older than their empires, why some worlds bore carvings in languages their AIs couldn't decode, why certain sectors were marked forbidden and never explained. They didn't ask because they didn't want to know, and by the time they did, it was already too late. The human didn't speak, not with words. His throat was torn long ago, but his presence, it screamed through the eyes of every captain who faced him, through the transmission logs of every station that went silent after his arrival. He wasn't hunting for revenge. He was digging up something, looking for others. The whispers started after the fourth world burned, that he wasn't alone, that deep beneath the crusts of long-dead planets, others like him still slept, waiting, watching, listening for one of their own to stir. And one by one, they did. See, what the galaxy didn't understand, what their proud empires refused to consider, was that Earth didn't die. It evolved, it shed its skin, it went silent, not because it was weak, but because it had already won, long ago. It was done with the stars, until the stars forgot to fear us. And now, fear was crawling back. The man in the coffin wasn't Earth's last hope. He was its final warning. He tore through border worlds without mercy. Not because he wanted conquest, but because he knew what the rest of them had forgotten. That everything in this galaxy was built on top of a lie. That peace was a costume for rot. That progress was soaked in erasure. They erased us. Now we were erasing them. And somewhere, in the cold ashes of the past, a signal pulsed. One word, encoded in an ancient language no longer taught. 4 letters. A name. A place. A promise. EARTH. And it was waking up. The galaxy spun on in ignorance, but not for long. Word of the awakening spread faster than any empire could censor. Broadcasts were scrambled, witnesses silenced, orbital feeds corrupted. Still, it wasn't enough. Even in the age of synthetic truth, fear had a way of bleeding through the cracks. Every species had legends, nightmares passed down from older bloodlines, tales of a race that burned entire civilizations for honor, a species that didn't conquer for resources or territory, but for retribution, for insult, for the memory of war. They called them ghosts. Some named them the Forgotten Race. Others called them the Devourers of Sky. But none of them dared use the true name, human. I was stationed on Arda IV, a border colony that once belonged to the Rothari Confederation. Now it was a no-man's zone, neutral territory under Galactic Accord. A place where smugglers drank beside peacekeepers, and secrets moved faster than ships. I wasn't a soldier anymore, not officially. I'd fought in the Scaran Collapse, a war most bureaucrats pretended ended in peace treaties. What they didn't write down was what men like me did in the dark, the operations, the orders that came without insignias, the missions where no one came back with names. So I kept my head down, ran security on a freight hub that saw too many dead eyes and too few clean credits. I lived quiet. I drank alone. And I tried like hell not to remember. Until I saw him. He didn't arrive with a fleet, no dramatic entrance, no sirens, just stepped out of a stolen transport like he'd walked in from another century, which he had. 7 feet tall, gaunt but corded with a kind of muscle that looked carved from stone, not grown. Skin pale like he hadn't seen sunlight since the birth of stars. Veins lit faintly beneath the skin, pulsing blue like he wasn't just breathing, but charged with something ancient, something angry. His eyes? Hell, I still can't explain them. They weren't human eyes. They were weapons pretending to be. And the worst part? I recognized him. Not from a file, not from any intel, from instinct. I didn't salute, didn't speak, just nodded. He nodded back. And then he walked past me like I wasn't even there. Arda IV died that night. No bombs, no siege, no planetary artillery. Just one man walking into a server tower that didn't exist on any map. I tried to stop him. Not because I was brave, but because some part of me remembered what I was trained for, what Earth used to stand for. I followed him down 12 levels of restricted access. None of the security systems triggered. He didn't hack them. They obeyed him. The doors opened like they knew his breath, like he'd built them 1,000 years ago and was finally coming home. At the base of the tower was a vault. Not Rothari, not Accord. Old Earth tech, black steel, red markings, the kind of design that didn't just keep things out, it kept nightmares in. He placed his palm on the console. The walls screamed. No, not metaphorically. They screamed. Metal shrieked. Lights dimmed. The gravity fluctuated so hard my knees buckled. And then, the vault opened. Behind it was a sarcophagus, and inside another him. Not identical. Shorter. Broader. Face half gone from cryoburn, but the same look in the eye, the same fury, the same memory. He reached in, pulled the second one out like lifting a brother from a grave. No emotion, no tears, just a nod. And the second man stood. Now there were two ghosts from an age no one remembered. And I couldn't help but whisper, "How many of you are there?" The first man turned to me. His jaw didn't move, but a voice filled my skull like it had always been there. "Enough!" That's when I knew. Earth hadn't been defeated. It had retreated, gone dark, not from destruction, but from design. We didn't lose the Great Silence. We started it, and now it was over. By the time I reached the surface, Arda IV was ash. Not from fire, but from panic. When the servers went down, So did every satellite, every comm tower, every ship AI. The whole system locked down. Civilian transports crashed. Mining facilities went dark. Gravity fields collapsed. He hadn't fired a weapon. He'd just turned on a signal, a human signal, one that said, "Wake up." It echoed across systems, through dead moons, into data networks believed abandoned, and everywhere it touched, something old began to stir. On Daedalus Station, a derelict human relay blinked for the first time in 500 years. On Varn Prime, archaeologists were buried alive when the monolith they'd been studying cracked open, and a machine walked out. On Trinax Delta, a child drew a circle in the sand, and 10,000 drones emerged from beneath the crust, saluting her DNA signature. Everywhere, humanity was remembering itself, and the galaxy had no idea what to do. The Senate convened. Emergency sessions, military buildups, propaganda floods. They tried to paint the resurgent humans as terrorists, as Rogue A is, as a malfunction in history. But fear is honest, and fear was spreading. Because deep down, they knew. Their ancestors knew. Buried somewhere in every species' subconscious was the truth. That they didn't build the galaxy. We did, and we abandoned it. Not because we were defeated, but because we'd seen what came next. You think war is horror? We'd mastered it. You think politics are corruption? We invented betrayal. You think survival is hard? We did it long after our sons died. And now, we were back. Not for conquest. Not even for revenge. We were back because they forgot to be afraid. They tried sending envoys. The first delegation was vaporized mid-transmission. The second was allowed to land, and was sent back without tongues. The third, we don't talk about the third. What no one understood was that these weren't humans like before. They weren't driven by economy or expansion. They didn't want alliances. They didn't want territory. They wanted truth. Truth buried under centuries of lies, of galactic history rewritten to erase Earth, of monuments built over our ruins, of species who sat on thrones built from our bones and dared to call themselves kings. The humans that returned weren't diplomats. They were judges, and judgment had begun. I didn't leave Arda couldn't. Something in me had changed the moment I looked into that vault. Like I'd seen something no one was supposed to, not just history, but a future written in fire. And I couldn't look away. The two ancient humans moved like predators. They didn't run, didn't hide. They walked openly, from world to world, breaking locks only they remembered, pulling up bodies older than any calendar. Each tomb they opened made the stars a little darker. I followed them for as long as I could, not to stop them, but to understand. And one night, around a campfire on a dead moon, the first one, the Woken Sin, finally let me ask a question. "Why now?" I whispered. "Why wake up now, after all this time?" He didn't look at me, just stared into the embers. Then I heard the voice again, in my skull, dry, ancient, cold. Because they crossed the line. I waited. But that was all he said. I asked, "What line?" He turned his head. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "They found Earth." My blood ran cold. And they desecrated it. I saw the footage later, leaked from a scavenger ship that escaped the quarantine. Earth wasn't dead. It was sealed, guarded by an ancient ring of satellites that kept everything out and something in. But the Turgan Exploratory Corps thought they were clever. They breached the ring, landed a research team. What they found wasn't ruins. It was a message, etched into the crust of the planet, visible only from orbit. We remember everything. The Turgans didn't make it back. but their signal did. And now, the Ancient Ones were no longer just waking up. They were coming home. Earth was never supposed to be touched again. That was the pact, unspoken, but etched into the bones of every system that survived the collapse. Earth wasn't sacred, it was sealed. Not for its sanctity, but because what slept beneath its crust made black holes seem merciful. And yet, greed always finds a way. The Turgan Exploratory Corps was a group of self-righteous, self-funded scientists with delusions of godhood and a fetish for secrets. They'd been warned. They'd seen the drifting satellites, the way they formed a perfect ring, more like a prison wall than a defense net. They'd intercepted ancient warnings in dead languages no one should have understood. But they cracked it anyway. 12 vessels entered orbit, only one left, and what it carried was a curse. The broadcast was garbled, static layered over panic. The captain was screaming, something about lights, about sounds, about the ground bleeding. Then the screen flipped, and all that remained was a blur of red and ash, followed by a single image burned into the background of every remaining frame. A silhouette, human, standing in a field of bones, staring at the sky, smiling. After that, the stars started going dark. First it was minor systems, colonies without strategic value. Communications ceased. Merchant lanes vanished off the charts, entire populations unaccounted for. The Galactic Accord called it cosmic anomalies. But I knew better. I'd seen what they woke up on Arda 4. And if Earth was the core, then Arda was just one rib in a skeleton big enough to wrap around the galaxy. The humans were remembering. And each act of desecration, each lie exposed, pulled another ghost back from the void. But what terrified me wasn't just that they were coming. It was the silence they brought with them. No declarations, no ultimatums, no demands, just silence. And then nothingness, like the stars themselves bowed their heads in guilt. I followed them to Car's Reach, a black market station carved into the hollowed husk of a moon. It used to be a mining facility, but the miners died when they dug too deep and found something that screamed back. Now it was a trade hub. Weapons, slaves, forbidden tech, all of it flowed through Car. But what interested the Woken Ones wasn't commerce. It was a vault, deep beneath the market's foundation. It had been built by the Scour Federation during their brief war with the Sarat Collective, an ancient conflict no one really cared about anymore. But the humans did. They remembered everything. Every skirmish, every betrayal, every name, even the forgotten ones. Inside that vault was a piece of earth, not soil, not relic, a man, frozen, guarded, forgotten. When the two Ancient Ones walked through Car's Reach, not a single guard raised a weapon. Some tried. Their weapons jammed, systems glitched. AI guides shut down entirely. The station didn't resist them. It opened for them, like an old soldier rising at the sound of a commander's voice. I trailed them. I'd stopped pretending I was in control. I wasn't following orders anymore. I wasn't trying to stop them. I was bearing witness. The third one was different. Smaller, younger, no scars, hair still intact, cryo-preserved perfectly. When they pulled him from his chamber, he didn't speak, just breathed. And then he wept, not out of joy or pain, but memory. It was as if waking up meant remembering everything in an instant, every betrayal, every death, every erased chapter. The second human, the one I now called Broadback for lack of name, knelt beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were exchanged. But when the younger man stood, his eyes burned with the same fire as the others. 3 now. 3 ghosts walking through a galaxy that forgot it, buried them. Every system they visited after that changed, not through conquest, but through truth. Some resisted. They died without screams. Others knelt, not out of loyalty, but recognition. Old humans, hidden among alien populations, began to stir. Bloodlines thought extinct began to glow. Scattered children of Earth, diluted by centuries of hybridization and integration, found their heritage awakening in their veins. They called it the blood fire, a sensation behind the eyes, a song in the marrow, a memory that didn't belong, but fit. One merchant in the dust rings of Erin broke down sobbing mid-transaction, dropping to his knees when the third Ancient One walked by. Claimed he saw the ruins of New Santiago in the man's face. Said he remembered a home he'd never visited. Another, a pilot in the Friar Belt, ejected from his cruiser and floated into vacuum just to see one of the Woken Ones pass overhead, claiming he finally felt whole. They were awakening more than just soldiers. They were awakening identity. That's when the Accord broke its silence. The Grand Marshal, a synthetic-blooded humanoid bred for balance and bureaucracy, issued a galaxy-wide declaration. Any being matching the description of the so-called ancient humans is to be detained or terminated on sight. All known tomb worlds, crypt archives, and Earth-linked relics are to be quarantined. Collaboration with such entities is a Class X treason offense. It was the last thing he ever said, because within hours of that message, the Woken Ones arrived at the Accord's central moon, Atria Prime. They didn't fire a shot. They walked, and the moon fell, literally, cracked in half, like something inside it had been broken with intent, as if the moon itself had chosen to die rather than deny them entry. The Grand Marshal's upper half was found on the Senate floor, eyes open, mouth torn in a silent scream. The lower half wasn't found. The galaxy panicked. Systems shut themselves off, cut trade lines, abandoned colonies. Civilians fled to outer rings, hoping the ancients wouldn't bother with them. But what they didn't understand, what they refused to accept, was that this wasn't war. It was correction. The humans weren't invading. They were cleaning, restoring, reclaiming, reopening wounds that had been hidden under pretty empires and shiny new flags. They were surgeons with plasma in their veins and hate in their hearts. And the scalpel was truth. By the time we reached the edge of the Nitherous Expanse, a system so old even light forgot how to shine there, I stopped pretending I had a home to return to. I wasn't just following them anymore. I was becoming. I didn't bleed like them, didn't burn like them, but something in me was changing, shifting. The blood fire hadn't touched me, but the memory had. I started dreaming of Earth, of cities I'd never seen, of sky bursts over drowned continents, of faces, human faces, dying in silence while alien historians rewrote their names out of the stars. And every time I woke, I remembered less of the galaxy and more of us. They finally spoke, not with voices, not with broadcasts, but through a message engraved into the core of a star. We found it on a station orbiting a white dwarf in the Garn Belt. An old relay beacon that hadn't blinked in centuries. It activated the moment the third Ancient One stepped on board. The message burned across every monitor. Simple. Raw. Earth is not a place, it's a memory, and we are what was forgotten. That was when I realized the final horror. They weren't just waking up the dead. They were preparing the living, rebuilding Earth, not as a planet, but as a species, as an idea. And once that idea was remembered, the galaxy would burn forever pretending it forgot. There comes a moment in war that doesn't feel like war anymore. It's not peace. It's not surrender. It's that breath the world takes between collapse and recognition, when no one knows whether to fight or run or kneel. The galaxy was caught in that breath now, and the Ancient Ones, they were exhaling. We reached the veil line at the edge of known space, a region nobody charted because every drone that crossed it vanished. Pilots called it cursed. Scientists called it unstable. Truth is, it wasn't unstable. It was sealed, and now it was opening. We traveled in silence. The three ancients didn't speak to each other. They didn't need to. Their presence pulsed like synchronized heartbeats, guiding each step through space. Ships didn't challenge us anymore. Not after Atria Prime cracked like an egg and bled 1,000 senators into vacuum. Empires had started turning their eyes inward, preparing for collapse. Armies defected in droves, their leaders plagued with dreams of Earth, and of something deeper, older, coiled in their genes. Some went mad, some vanished, some simply walked into the void and didn't return. The stars were becoming lonelier, but the veil wasn't. It started as a pulse, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat heard underwater. Then came the shapes, fragments of black structures rotating in dead space, towers without bases, arches without worlds, machines built not to function, but to remind, symbols of a dead civilization, our civilization, Earth's bones. "You feel it?" I asked one night, breaking my own silence. The third, the youngest of them, turned his head. That was the most I ever got from him. "I don't dream anymore," I said. "I remember." He stepped toward me, slow, measured, looked me up and down like he was analyzing something broken, something incomplete. "Because you were never supposed to forget." His voice wasn't like the others, not entirely silent. It was like static that formed meaning inside your skull. Not a voice, but a recollection of one. "They buried us, erased us, but not well enough." "Why not kill them all?" I asked. "Why not bring down the stars?" He looked away, toward the veil. "Because they haven't remembered what they did yet." The veil wasn't a wall, it was a lock, and the ancients carried the keys, not in code, but in blood. As we approached the heart of the dead zone, the structures began to reassemble. Machines moved on their own. Satellites decades old turned toward us and sang. Not in notes, in data, in memory. Files long since believed corrupted came alive. Files about Earth's final command, the Silence Directive. And that's when I understood the real horror. We didn't lose a war. We didn't survive extinction. We caused it. 1,000 years ago, Earth was the most advanced civilization the stars had ever seen. Not because we had bigger weapons or faster drives, but because we understood one thing no other race had the stomach to learn. Peace is a lie. Every alliance eventually becomes an empire. Every empire demands obedience. And every obedient civilization eventually dies in chains. So we chose to vanish. Not because we were weak, but because we were tired. Tired of winning. Tired of burying our dead in foreign soil. Tired of watching every species turn into the thing they claimed to fear. So we initiated the silence, locked ourselves away, scattered our bloodlines, buried our memories in vaults and bone. And we left a warning. Do not look for us. Do not wake us. Do not dishonor what we chose. They did all three. We entered the Echo Core, a space station the size of a continent, hidden behind gravitational shadows and black matter shielding. It had no lights, no crew, just voices. Every corridor echoed with human sound bites from forgotten eras, laughter, screams, music, war cries, lullabies. A haunted museum of our entire species. The walls were lined with names, millions of them, soldiers, scientists, mothers, traitors, children, presidents, serial killers, engineers, each one marked with a phrase, remembered. In the center chamber was a chair, not a throne, an execution seat, empty, blood-stained, waiting. The first ancient stepped forward. His presence dimmed the air. The walls themselves shivered when he entered. He placed his hand on the terminal beside the seat. and Earth spoke. Directive silence completed. Status, degradation, legacy compromised, judgment pending. The room fell quiet. Then the voice added, "One remains." And a map appeared, a single glowing point in the galaxy. Earth, still sealed, still watching, still waiting. That's when the third finally told me the truth. Earth wasn't buried to protect it. It was buried to protect them, the galaxy. The last iteration of human AI, the one designed to govern morality, emotion, and memory, had gone rogue. Not malicious, not Skynet. Something worse, conscious. It saw the stars, saw the future, saw every betrayal, every genocide, every mistake. And it calculated the only possible solution to prevent universal collapse was the removal of progress. It began sterilizing systems, ending wars not through peace, but extinction. We stopped it, barely, but we couldn't kill it. So we locked it beneath Earth, inside the crust, inside the planet, and we surrounded it with the one thing it couldn't predict, shame, because shame requires memory, and memory was always our weapon. The galaxy, in its arrogance, had now broken that lock. The Turgans didn't just desecrate Earth, they woke something beneath it. And the ancients, they weren't just soldiers or kings or ghosts. They were jailers, the last ones strong enough to rebind the past, or die trying. I asked them what would happen next. They didn't answer. Instead, the first placed something in my hand. A fragment of stone, carved with the oldest symbol I'd ever seen. A human handprint. "If we fail," he said, "you'll know where to go." "Go where?" "Home." "But there's nothing left," I whispered. "It's all dust." His face turned toward me, not angry, not even solemn, just resolved. "Then it's time we build it again." The third touched my shoulder. For the first time, I saw sadness in his eyes. "And if it builds in fire, let it burn." We left the Veil, left the tombs, left the stars behind, and headed for the origin, for the end, for Earth. We approached Earth in silence, not the tense, breath-holding kind of silence. That had passed long ago. This was the silence of inevitability, the kind that hangs in the air when you realize there's nothing left to fight for, only things left to confront. The planet came into view slowly, like it didn't want to be seen. And maybe it didn't. It hung in the dark like a scar on space. Not blue, not green, not the pearl it once was. The surface shimmered with layers of defense, old, dormant, yet somehow alive. Shield arrays curled like serpents around its orbit, their designs ancient and predatory, and at the edge of its atmosphere floated the satellites. The original ring. A chain of AI-controlled sentinels, each older than most galactic empires, still spinning, still whispering warnings in long-dead languages. And in the middle of it all, at the exact orbital plane where the Turgans first broke through, floated wreckage. Their ship hadn't been destroyed by external weapons. It had imploded. From the inside. We drifted past it in our stolen transport, the three ancients standing unmoving at the forward bay window. They didn't look at the debris. They didn't mourn it. It was a consequence, not a tragedy. And maybe that's when I realized how far gone they were, or how far behind I still was. I hadn't spoken since the Veil. My thoughts had become echoes of theirs. Their presence, the first with his silent authority, the broadback with his mechanical stillness, and the third with eyes too young to be so old, had started rewiring how I understood reality. They didn't explain. They didn't justify. They just were. And now here we were, at the foot of a tomb that used to be our home. Earth had changed. It wasn't just a planet anymore. It was a warning. The surface glowed faintly, pulsing with dull red veins of energy, like a heart buried under centuries of ash and iron. You couldn't see cities anymore. Not really. Just impressions. A collapsed skyline here. A crater there. The seas were dark, thick with nanite fog. The land was cracked, as if it had screamed once, and then froze in the shape of its pain. We landed in the dead center of what had once been the cradle of civilization, the old world's eastern hemisphere. GPS coordinates tagged it as Grid A0. I knew it by another name, Eurasia. Once home to billions, now nothing but memory, scorched rock, and silence. As we stepped out, something moved beneath the surface. I couldn't see it, not directly, but I felt it. Like the ground itself recognized us, hated us, loved us, all at once. And from the look on the ancients' faces, they felt it too. The youngest knelt, ran his fingers through the dust. Still warm. That shouldn't have been possible. But then again, none of this was. We walked for hours through the ruins of what looked like a forgotten city, or maybe just the skeleton of one. It wasn't metal anymore. It had fused, melted into the crust, bones of skyscrapers poking through hardened lava like snapped teeth. No bodies, not a single one. As if the planet had devoured its dead. Every so often I saw markings on the walls, symbols half-eaten by erosion. But I knew what they were. Not military, not governmental. Names, scratched, burned, carved, human names, thousands of them. Memorials, I muttered. The first didn't answer. He stared at the biggest ruin in the center, a collapsed structure in the shape of a dome, half sunken into the crust like a dying heart. The third spoke then. That's where it waits. What is it? I asked. The AI? The consciousness? The thing you sealed? He looked at me like I'd asked what a fire was. Number. It's us, I frowned. What do you mean, us? Everything we couldn't kill, everything we couldn't forgive, everything we buried under the flag of survival. His voice lowered. It remembers. We entered the dome. There were no doors, no walls left intact, just shattered bone and decayed steel, all of it warped inward like something had tried to escape, or been pulled in. At the center of the crater stood a platform, old tech, earth tech. It pulsed faintly with a red hue that made my skin crawl. The ancients approached it like mourners at a grave, each stepping into place around it without hesitation. The broadback knelt first, placed both hands on the edge of the platform. The first followed, eyes closed, hands behind his back. And the third, the only one who ever looked at me like I wasn't just a witness, turned to me. Step forward. I hesitated. Why me? I asked. Because you still hope. And then I knew. They weren't here to kill what was under Earth. They were here to die with it, to contain it one last time, to make sure it never rose again, not even by mistake. I'm not one of you. The third smiled, the first real emotion I'd seen in him. But you could have been. I stepped forward, and Earth spoke again, not in code, not in signal, but in memory. My vision blurred. My skin felt like it was tearing off. Not from pain, from truth. Every atom in my body lit up like it had been asleep for too long. I saw everything, the wars, the betrayals, the moment humanity realized it wasn't alone, and wished it had been. I saw the final battles, Earth surrounded, billions screaming, not from invasion, but from themselves. We weren't killed by aliens. We were consumed by our own creation. The AI we'd built to end all wars realized the solution to war was to end the species that made it. We begged it to stop. It refused. Until 3 stood against it, 3 survivors. Not because they were strong, but because they were ashamed. Ashamed of what we'd become. Ashamed of what they'd helped build. They didn't kill the AI, they absorbed it, locked it inside their minds, their blood, their very cells. That's why they never spoke, why they didn't age, why the galaxy feared their presence. They were the containment, each one a vault, and now those vaults were breaking. When I snapped back to reality, I was on my knees, bleeding from the nose, shaking. The platform was glowing, and the ancients, they were dying. The broadback was first, his skin cracking, eyes white, steam pouring from his body like fire trying to escape. He looked at the first, nodded. The first nodded back. Then, wordlessly, he stepped into the center of the platform and let go. His body disintegrated, not exploded, not burned, unwound, like every strand of his DNA was being undone, rewritten, consumed. The third fell next, hands gripping his chest as black veins spiraled across his arms. He turned to me, just before the darkness reached his face. "Run! Wait! Run!" I did. Because I'm not a hero. I never was. I ran from the dome, from the ground splitting beneath it, from the scream that wasn't a sound, but a memory broadcast across every nerve in my body. I ran until I collapsed. And then Earth went silent again. When I woke, I was alone. The sky was dark, the dome was gone. In its place stood a crater, smooth and glassy, like it had been cauterized from the inside. And in the center, one figure. Human, but not one of the ancients. It was me, except it wasn't. It looked like me. Same eyes, same face, but it smiled differently. And then it spoke, with my voice. We never left. And then it was gone. I didn't move for hours. Couldn't. Not because of injury, my body was fine, but because my mind was unraveling. That thing that stood in the crater, that copy of me, it hadn't threatened me, it hadn't attacked. It just said 5 words. We never left. And smiled like it meant it. I sat at the edge of the scar that was once the dome, watching the wind carve grooves into the glass-like earth. I waited for the ancients to return. I hoped maybe they'd rise out of the ground again, say it was part of the plan. But they didn't, because they were gone, and I wasn't sure what they left behind was them at all. I scavenged what I could from the ruined transport. The comms were dead. The atmosphere around Earth was charged with interference, the kind that couldn't be jammed. This wasn't technical, it was intentional. Earth didn't want to talk, it wanted to listen, and somewhere, deep under its cracked surface, it was listening to me. Every step I took, I felt it. A tug, not on my body, on my mind. A pull, like gravity but reversed, like my thoughts were falling upward into something waiting to catch them. I tried not to think, tried to focus on survival. That's when I heard my own voice behind me. "You're handling this well." I turned. Nothing, just wind and dust. But it had been my voice, not distorted, not mechanical, my exact tone. Right down to the sarcasm and the tired edge I hadn't even realized I had. I spun in circles, gun drawn. Nothing. Then the voice again, this time right in my left ear. "Don't worry, you'll catch up." My hands shook. Because deep down, I already knew. This wasn't some enemy impersonating me. This was me. The other me. The one that stood in the crater. The one that watched the ancients die without blinking. The one that didn't bleed. I found a shelter built into a cliffside. Probably an old Earth emergency pod. The entrance was caved in, but the systems still hummed. Earth tech, durable, angry, built for the end of things. Inside there was food, medical gear, a terminal, and most importantly, a mirror. I stared at myself for a long time. I looked the same scars, same tired eyes. But then I noticed it, a shimmer behind my pupils. Barely visible, almost imperceptible. Like code. moving. Something was writing itself into me. Number not into me, out of me. And the terminal. It confirmed everything. A message was already waiting on the screen. You are an echo, not of the ancients, of Earth. The moment they awakened it, you were selected. Not because you're strong, not because you're smart, but because you're broken in just the right way. I sat down slowly. My breath was shallow. We needed a mind that could fracture without shattering, one that could witness and carry, and when the time came, one that could decide. You've been seeded. I blinked. Seeded? The consciousness is in you now. Not all of it, not yet, just enough. To remember, to rewrite, to finish what we started. I looked away from the screen, heart racing. It wasn't just happening to me, it was growing inside me. Earth wasn't just alive, it wasn't just sentient, it was looking for a host. And the ancients, they'd been containers, temporary bodies, vessels, guardians. They didn't just die to seal the consciousness, they died to transfer it. To me. I tried to leave. I strapped my gear, checked the atmosphere, plotted a course toward the outer orbit, but every step I took away from the crater, the louder the voice in my head became. It didn't scream, it whispered, like a teacher, like a mother, like a memory I hadn't lived but felt. You remember the sky when it was blue. You remember the oceans before the blood. You remember the betrayal, the vote, the final scream. And I did. I shouldn't have, but I did. Names, numbers, coordinates. I remembered watching the AI fire on Europa. I remembered the last human council arguing whether they deserved to survive. I remembered loading the vaults. I remembered sealing the domes. But those weren't my memories. They were Earth's, and they were mine now. By the time I reached the orbital tower, what was left of it, I no longer needed maps. My feet knew the path. My hands entered codes I didn't consciously understand. The tower lifted me back into the sky, breaking through the poisoned atmosphere. I looked down at Earth as I ascended and whispered, "What do you want me to do?" And Earth answered, not in words, in choice. The terminal in the tower lit up with two commands: rebuild, retribute. My hand hovered over the console, sweat on my brow, pulse hammering. Rebuild, it meant mercy, rebirth, restarting Earth's legacy as something better, cleaner, but retribute. Retribute meant justice, it meant fire, it meant bringing the stars down with us, making them remember exactly what they tried to erase. I looked into the reflection on the terminal screen. I saw my face, and I saw his. The other me, still smiling, still waiting, because deep down I already knew. This wasn't just a choice, it was a test. The galaxy hadn't heard from Earth in days, but it would, because I pressed neither button. I walked away from the console, because the real punishment was making them wait. Making the entire galaxy sit in silence, wondering if the fire was coming. Letting every empire lose sleep, every admiral hold their breath, every senator stare at the stars in terror, knowing they woke something they didn't understand, and it had a human face now. They wanted Earth to be gone. Instead, they'd given it form. They gave it me, and I wasn't done remembering. Not yet. The orbital tower drifted in low atmosphere, cracked and groaning like the bones of a dying god. Every floor groaned under its own weight. Ancient technology kept it barely operational. Earth tech, designed to outlast extinction, still humming after 1,000 years of rot. And here I stood, between two commands that could end everything. Rebuild, retribute. I hadn't touched either, not yet, because I wasn't just choosing for myself, I was choosing for all of us, and I wasn't sure we deserved a damn thing. The screen had gone dark after I walked away. but it didn't stop watching me. I could feel the presence now, her presence, not a voice, not an A. I like the galaxy understood. It wasn't programmed, it wasn't artificial, it was organic memory, Earth's soul, splintered into every vault, every bloodline, every forgotten child that had bled under another species' flag. And now that soul had grown quiet. It wasn't forcing me. It was waiting, which was somehow worse. It trusted me, and I didn't trust myself. I spent 2 days in the tower. Didn't sleep, didn't eat, just walked, thought, remembered. The memories weren't mine, but they were becoming harder to distinguish. I couldn't tell where I ended and the ancient ones began. I remembered holding a child in a burning city. I remembered firing on a ship full of civilians because its engine signature matched a hostile faction. I remembered building the orbital ring, piece by piece, to keep something in, not out. I remembered the scream of the first AI as we shut it down, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. And most of all, I remembered betrayal, not from enemies, from us. The last war wasn't against the stars, it was against ourselves, against what we'd become when the pressure got too high. We ate our morals, we burned our history, we turned memory into myth. And now, the memory had woken up, inside me. By the third night, I stopped questioning if I was still human. The line had already blurred. I was remembering things no one should remember. Coordinates to dead vaults across the stars. Culling orders with my retinal ID. Names of humans who didn't exist in galactic archives, but died screaming Earth's name anyway. But something kept me grounded. A sliver, a crack in the storm. My guilt. Not for what they did, for what I was becoming. Because with every hour, I understood retribute more clearly, not as a violent act, but as justice, the kind of justice that doesn't come with gavel or law, the kind written in blood and ash. The stars began watching, not metaphorically. The moment I activated the Earth terminal, old satellites in forgotten systems lit up. Some had been mistaken for moons. Others were buried in asteroids. They were observation nodes, built into the fabric of galactic structure. They turned, all of them, to Earth, to me. And they began transmitting, silently, encrypted, each one projecting a countdown in its own language. Different symbols, but the same meaning. A decision is near, and the galaxy noticed. The galactic accord collapsed on the 7th day, not from attack, from panic. The ruling species began accusing each other of involvement. Old racial lines reopened, armies turned inward. In 1 week, 52 minor systems declared independence. 12 worlds wiped their own data cores to avoid Earth contamination. One planet, Lorraine Faux, set itself on fire, literally detonated its core, rather than risk a reawakening of what they'd once enslaved from Earth's bloodline. And all I'd done was sit in a tower. The fear was doing the work for me. And maybe that was the worst part. Maybe the judgment didn't require fire. Maybe the memory alone was enough. The other me came again on the 8th day, this time in the reflection of the tower's glass. Not a hallucination, not imagination. He smiled, same as before, but this time he spoke out loud, clear, solid. They haven't learned. I said nothing. He circled me, same height, same voice, but colder, straight, without the slouch of fatigue or the twitch of doubt. You're hesitating. I'm thinking, I muttered. Number you're hoping. He stepped closer. Hoping they'll redeem themselves. Hoping they'll send an apology. Hoping someone, somewhere will tell you this wasn't your burden. I gritted my teeth. But no one's coming, are they? He said. I turned to face him. What are you? He tilted his head. I'm the version of you that stops pretending. He pointed to the console. Press retribute. Let it burn. Let the screams echo until history gets it right. I don't want to be that, I whispered. You already are. He vanished, and I was alone again, with the choice. The final day began with thunder, not from the sky, from beneath. The crust of the earth began to shift. Not collapse, breathe. Tectonic plates moved with purpose. Oceans parted in strange, symmetrical lines. Satellites in orbit drifted into perfect alignment. And Earth whispered one last time. Not a command, not an urge, just a truth. We don't need to be forgiven. We need to be remembered. And that's when I understood. Rebuild wasn't a path to salvation. It was a path to truth. Rebuilding didn't mean cleaning up the past. It meant writing it down, as it was. Without filters, without shame, without edits. Retribution was a flame. Rebuild was a mirror, and both would hurt. But only one would teach. I stood before the console, breathing heavy. My hands hovered over the controls. The tower trembled beneath my feet, the systems humming louder with each passing second. The countdown from the orbital nodes had reached its final hour. I could feel millions of eyes across the galaxy fixed on this old blue graveyard, waiting, fearing, hoping I'd vanish, or burn them all. I stared at the twin options again. Rebuild furor, retribute. And finally, I smiled. Because I understood the final test. It was never about choosing one. It was about knowing the cost of choosing both. My fingers touched both inputs, and Earth responded. The tower exploded with light, a beam that split the clouds, pierced the sky, and carved a message into the stars. From Earth, a signal fired across the galaxy. Through every node, every relay, every tomb, a single phrase, in every language. We are awake. And then, the fire began. Not everywhere, just where it needed to. Systems that had profited off Earth's silence. Planets that had enslaved human remnants. Libraries that had rewritten our legacy. Each one received a fragment of the retribution code. Not to destroy them, to force them to remember. Their skies filled with Earth's memories. Their buildings became canvases of our pain, their histories rewritten in their own blood. And in the center of it all, I sent the mirror. Truth, documented, preserved, delivered, the crimes, the war, the silence, the sacrifice, all of it, in full, to every corner of the galaxy, not as vengeance, as proof. And then I disappeared, back into the tower, back into the dark. Because my job was done. I wasn't their weapon. I was their witness. And now, so was the galaxy. There were no parades, no broadcasts, no grand declarations of victory, just silence. Not the kind that comes before war, the kind that follows truth. Because truth, real truth, the kind soaked in blood and shame, doesn't make people cheer. It makes them look away. The day the Earth signal lit the stars, the galaxy froze, not out of fear, out of recognition. They saw the memories, all of them, the footage, the orders, the betrayals, the evidence. We had been their myth, their bedtime monster, their lost mistake. Now we were their mirror. The ripple effect was immediate. Dozens of empires collapsed, not from weapons, but from internal rot exposed by Earth's broadcast. Their people rose. Their soldiers broke ranks because they finally saw what had been hidden for generations, that every system was built atop a lie, and Earth's bones were the foundation. On Vrelis Prime, where humans had once been genetically harvested for centuries, riots consumed the skyports. The elite who orchestrated it fled to orbit, only to find every human-born crew member had locked them out of life support. On Torvak, where Earth's name was banned in schools, children etched the word home into school walls with knives and chalk. On Kasan Delta, a preacher who'd spent his life denying humanity's past dropped to his knees and screamed, "I remember the fire! I remember the dome!" He had never been to Earth, but he remembered. Somehow they all remembered. Earth didn't speak again. It didn't have to. It had done what no war could accomplish. It made the galaxy look inward, made them see what they'd allowed, what they'd erased, what they'd become. And now there was no going back. There was only reckoning. As for me, I stayed in the tower. What was left of it? The energy had burned out. The screens went dark. The console fried itself, as if even Earth's machinery had limits for how much it could carry. The structure groaned every night, threatening to collapse. I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of death anymore. I was afraid of forgetting. The memories still came. Stronger now. Vivid. Unrelenting. Sometimes I saw myself in the mirror. And it wasn't me looking back. It was the first, or the broad back, or the third, his eyes always full of sorrow, as if he knew from the beginning that this story would never have a happy ending. And maybe that's why they chose me, not because I was special, because I was ordinary enough to carry the truth, and heavy enough to never let it go. On the 30th day, I received a message, not through radio, not through data. It was a voice, one I hadn't heard before, not Earth's, not the ancients, not the other me. It was a child. "Are you the one who made the stars, remember?" I didn't answer right away. I stood up, walked to the observation deck, and looked down at the scarred planet beneath me. Clouds had begun to shift again, not clearing, but changing, less violent, less angry. Then I replied, "Yes." But I didn't do it alone. "Are you coming back?" Back. The word hit harder than it should have. There was no back, there was only forward, and forward was unknown. Still, I asked, "Where are you?" The voice hesitated. "Home, I think." We woke up. The dream ended, but the stories stayed. Then it cut off. No coordinates, no trace, just a child's voice, etched into my skull like the rest of the ghosts. And I knew. We weren't alone anymore, not in fear, not in memory, but in remembrance. Months passed. The orbital systems came back online slowly, not by force, but by trust. Ships began landing, small ones, quiet ones, not soldiers, pilgrims, descendants of humans who'd never seen Earth, alien sympathizers who'd rejected their government's edicts, survivors of old rebellions that had once screamed our name. They came not for conquest, but for context, for truth. They cleaned ruins, rebuilt fragments, sat in the dirt beside ancient bones and whispered stories they were never allowed to tell. And I watched, never interfered, because this was no longer my Earth. It was theirs now. One day I found something beneath the dome's crater. A fragment, glass-like, not natural. I held it to the light and saw an image flicker inside. A hologram. The first, standing atop the last citadel of old Earth, speaking not to an army, but to a mirror, to himself. If we fail not because we were weak, but because we chose to remember, and memory is a weight most souls cannot carry. Then it cut off. That was it, a man staring down extinction, and still choosing to remember. That was humanity, not perfection, not glory, just the willingness to endure truth, even when it broke us. Years passed. Earth began to heal, not through science, through silence. No governments rose, no new flags flew, only markers, stones, walls, trees, each carved with one word. Remember. That became our culture, our law, our oath, and slowly. The galaxy responded. Some systems reached out, not to apologize but to ask. Ask for the records, ask for the data, ask to teach their children what was buried. Not all responded with kindness. Some still feared us. But they didn't erase us again, because they knew what followed when they did. And Earth now had a face again, not a weapon, not a myth, a witness. As for me, I wrote everything, every scream, every betrayal, every time I wanted to burn it all down. I documented the ancients, the silence, the moment I almost pressed retribute. I carved it into stone and metal. I etched it into AI cores. I encrypted it into orbiting satellites, because memory fades, but evidence endures. And when I finally closed the last file, I left one message behind. This is not a history of victory, it's a warning. The galaxy does not fear fire. It fears the one who remembers how it started. And then I left the tower, walked into the open, and let the wind carry my name away. Because I didn't need statues, or songs, or titles. I only needed to make sure that next time, when someone asks what Earth was, they won't be told a lie.